Hi, everybody. Welcome to the second installment of PGC's series, Setting Up in America. Today's webinar is hosted by PGC's Jeremy Wastall, and we'll discuss immigration. We're joined by experts Charlotte Slocombe and Paul Samartin. Jeremy, over to you.
Thanks, Charles. Everyone, welcome again to the series Setting Up in America. Today we're going to be focusing on immigration, but just a quick intro from each of the panel members. So Jeremy Wastall here, Commercial Director for PGC. PGC are a workforce management platform working with clients such as recruitment agencies or small SME businesses looking to go into the US, and we would basically become the employer on behalf of their workers. And I'm joined here with Charlotte and Paul. If you just quickly want to introduce yourselves.
Yeah. Oh, go ahead, ladies first. Sorry. Jesus.
So my name is Charlotte Slocombe. I'm a partner at Fragomen in London. We have about 46 offices around the world, and I specialise in US immigration. I'm a US attorney and UK solicitor, and yeah, I kind of focus on the SMEs, particularly in the kind of UK and Europe, Middle East, and Africa market. So kind of helping people get out to the US.
Perfect. All right. Very similar. My name is Paul Samartin from Ganguin, which is a firm that I'm a senior partner of. We have one office internationally, which is in Shoreditch, London. We work with lots of different companies to help them go to the US and also come to the UK. So we do both US immigration and UK immigration. Our main focus is on tech, recruitment, media, television, and entertainment.
Great, thanks guys. So just to jump in and kind of set the scene for everyone. Initial question is really just what's going on in the US at the moment. What actually is the immigration climate?
You want me to start?
Yeah, you can start.
That's great. It's really welcoming. I don't know if you've seen the news, but I think everybody really wants people to come to America, the government. They're really open to it. No, it's terrible. So the Trump administration is probably the most, I mean, it is the most anti-immigrant administration we've had since like maybe, I don't know, 100 plus years. So they definitely don't want illegal, what they call illegal immigrants coming to the US. They don't want legal immigrants coming to the US. The legal immigrants who are there, they want to make it difficult for them to stay. It's really not a great time. As I'm sure most of the people who are either listening or watching have come across, the denial rates have increased exponentially, I think, in the past 2 years. So it is a really tough climate right now. So do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, I totally agree, particularly because US immigration is very discretionary. What we found as immigration practitioners is that the adjudicators have become more protectionist in their kind of adjudication. So to Paul's point, there's been a rise in refusal rates where there wouldn't have been a problem historically. I do think within the context of what we're going to be talking about, I think within the e-visa context, it hasn't necessarily affected the kind of SME investor, but it's more the employees, particularly those that haven't worked for the business very long, but we'll talk about that later. But so there definitely has been a rise in refusals, a rise in what we call security clearance delays, where people have a hit against their name. That has definitely kind of spiked.
You made it sound like they're going to be assassinated. You can explain that later.
So basically,
they're not going to get killed.
When you apply for a visa, you're kind of stuck in admin processing delays. But again, we'll talk about that later. But there are definitely some executive orders that have come through, particularly the Buy America, Hire America, which is kind of permeated within the kind of the Foreign Affairs Manual, which is what the embassy uses to kind of adjudicate the visas. That has definitely come through, that protectionism in terms of whether they're likely to approve the visa or not. So, yeah.
Great, thanks.
Yeah, I think probably one of the points, just kind of following up on what you said, is Charlotte, is that a lot of the adjudicators they have their own personal bias, so they have their own views. So they might have worked in finance, so they think they know what everybody does in financial services. They might know what recruitment is, so they think they know everything about recruitment. A lot of the guys are very knowledgeable, but they all have their bias. So when you have a administration that's saying, we don't want people coming in, or we want to slow down the amount of people coming in, it plays to the worst bias in people. So if you
okay.
have officers who are already aggressive, they're not going to be tempered by the administration saying, it's okay, do what you have to do. You have to protect America. You've got to protect American workers. Whereas if you have an adjudicator that feels like that, and you've got an administration that's more pro-immigration, you know, they're tempered by that. They're not, you know, they're following the guidance. They're trying to stay within the guidance. The problem with a lot of what Trump is doing, like the Buy American, Hire American, it gives the consular officer or the adjudicator, if it's something that's a petition based that goes to the U.S., it gives them a lot more leeway to make a decision that's totally subjective and not objective at all. So we've got laws in
Based
place.
on their bias.
We've got laws in place. We've got regulations. We've got guidance, and there's lots of discretion there for the officers to make a determination. But when you have things like this executive order, Buy American, Hire American, you're effectively saying, oh, if you think a U.S. worker can do this job, then the person shouldn't get a visa. Well, that lends to the person looking at things at a really subjective level, not really objective at all. And I think that makes it quite difficult. Which is something I think I've never seen really before.
Yeah, I mean, the UK system is based on an objective points-based system, which has its flaws, but it's that black and white kind of transparency piece. The subjectivity of US immigration does have its benefits, but equally it's really difficult for employers to have that kind of assurity that they've got the consistency. And it's this kind of changing the goalposts for us as legal practitioners advising clients. It's really difficult because those goalposts keep changing.
And we're relying on the law and the regulations and what is actually factually correct and what they should be looking at.
But then they're operating more towards their bias on top of the law as well.
I think just one thing to add before we move on to the next slide is that there's different government bodies that don't particularly always like each other. So we're going to be talking about the Department of State, who is effectively the US Embassy that adjudicates the visa piece. And then you've got Customs and Border Protection at the borders. So CBP are equally having this kind of, they're more seen as law enforcers, but I've seen kind of, actually globally, to be honest, kind of the business travelers are kind of undergoing greater scrutiny than they have historically. So you need to be very careful about, well, I've got away with this for X amount of years, so therefore I'm fine. And it's that kind of shift, having done immigration for a long time, it's that kind of shift that travellers need to be really careful of.
So one of these is, and we'll kind of probably come on to it a bit later, is the B visas, the B1 and B2, or S's, people actually going out to the US performing work under these visas when...
you can't work under those visas.
No, exactly. Which is kind of what they shouldn't be doing. And they've probably previously been doing. Okay, so to jump onto the next slide, I know that today we're kind of looking more towards one visa in particular, but from a more general high-level perspective at the moment, when a company is looking at America, thinking about expanding there and perhaps wanting to get some people, what are their options?
Yeah, I mean, it's called alphabet soup, but there's really only kind of a few visa classes that will be relevant to a business.
Okay.
So the E visa, which is and I think Paul's preferred visa class, and then you've got the L, which is the intercompany transfer, which is actually probably the more commonly used one, and then the H1B, which is needed for the new hires, which I'll talk about in a minute. And they're kind of the three main categories for business. There are some alternative options if you don't fit into those three, but they become a bit more tricky to kind of maneuver. So I think it's worth just concentrating on those three. So the E is based on a treaty, and we'll talk about the UK treaty with the US. It's an 1815 treaty, but most of European countries have an similar treaty with the US. And it's useful because you can use it for new hires, but the company has to be the nationality of the treaty. So, for example, here the company has to be majority British. Again, we'll go into that a little bit more detail in a minute. And then the individual has to be British as well. So you couldn't use, for example, the E if you had a British company and you're trying to get a German national in. That wouldn't work. The only option there would be the L1. So the L1 is the intercompany transfer. That can be used in a new company type setup, but you have to have a parent subsidiary still in existence in the UK. So whereas the E, you could be setting up a new business entirely with no subsidiary parently still remaining in the UK. There, for the L, for that to work, there needs to be that entity still in existence in the UK. So there's that parent subsidiary link. And critically, the person has to have worked with you for more than a year in the last 3, whereas that doesn't apply with the E.
Got it. So the E is your option for newer hires.
Yes.
L is for someone, perhaps, if it's a little bit easier for someone who's worked with you for 12 months, you've already got an entity. But would it make sense if, let's say you've got someone that's worked for you for 12 months, you are setting up an entity in the US anyway, so you've got 2 options at that point, the L visa, L1, and the E visa. Would there be a preference from your perspective?
Yeah, for me, I prefer the E because it's a one-stop shop, so you can file directly at the embassy in London. Whereas with the L, there's 2 stages. You have to file with USCIS, which is basically the Home Office in the States, and then you have to still apply for the visa. So it's 2 stages, whereas the E is a 1 stage.
Got it.
One of the other benefits is that the E is cheaper in terms of government fees, and the refusal rates statistically are a lot higher, particularly in this administration for the L's. There isn't actually any kind of advertised E refusal rates, but I think I think Paul possibly would find the same. I think,
10% of E visas are refused.
I mean, that's overall visas. So it could be higher. So we see across the board, I think for recruitment, there are a lot higher denial rates for specialists. Right. But and this is something I talk to my clients about a lot. A lot of that is because people are making applications for people who just don't qualify. So if you have a big recruitment company that's sending 50 people over, and they're just taking people who have 6 months total experience in recruitment because they've done a good job. And that's all they've done.
They're not really.
That's not really a application that's going to get approved, right? It doesn't really qualify under their guidance. So, that causes a problem as well. So we can't really look at denial rates in a vacuum and say this is how it is for this and this is what it is. But what the embassy has told us recently is that the denial rates overall for all of their E's, including different industries, everything, is about 10%. Okay.
Now, before we move into more detail on the E visa, H1B.
Yeah.
So we're more talking about general business stuff at this point.
Yeah.
So if we're looking, you've got the L visa, the E visa, you mentioned the H1B visa for someone that's maybe got an existing business, so they've kind of ruled out the E visas for the E2, especially the investor. The L1, let's say they can't go down that route. H1B, is that an option for someone to kind of send someone in?
I mean, it would only be an option. So you have to already have a US entity incorporated. But I think the challenge with the H's, which is, I think in my mind, doesn't make it massively viable unless you've already got somebody working for you in the US as a student, because you have to file on that 1st of April date, which is based on the fiscal date, and to start on the 1st of October. And there's roughly, the last few years, correct me if I'm wrong, about 25% chance of getting through the lottery system.
The lottery system.
Yeah. So I don't think strategically it's a viable option for most businesses. What most businesses will probably do if they've got a new hire is probably recruit that person in the foreign office if they have one, and then make the L1 then a future opportunity. The H's are not a great option unless you already have that person in the US and they're working with you on a student what they call an OPT visa.
Then you get the employment authorization document.
Yes, exactly. And then you can kind of apply for the H, and sometimes you get a couple of chances, bites of the apple. But I think I don't know what your views are.
Yeah, I think with the H, I think the problem is, I think you only use that in that instance where you have most American companies can't, if they don't have a subsidiary outside the US, they can't do a transfer. so they're stuck due to age.
Yeah.
So you're competing with all the American companies. The benefit non-US companies have, you've got things like the E2, E1 treaty visas. You've got the L1 if you're setting up an office, you can transfer people. So there's lots of competition. Most of the people that are applying for those visas are students. So they're on OPT, which is a postgraduate training scheme. And it allows them to have multiple bites of the apple, right? So a lot of times if you're in like a STEM field, science, technology, engineering, maths, you can stay in the US on OPT, I think for like, what is it, 36 months now?
Yeah, I think so.
And so you can try to get the H-1B 3 times, right?
Okay.
For somebody who just wants to hire somebody and put them out there, it doesn't make any sense unless you've tried to do something like an L and it got denied, and you're trying to do H now. What I would say about recruitment H's, there's a couple problems. One is if you get selected, that's the first part of the battle. So the Trump administration is crushing the H-1B. And the reason for that is they use it for third-party placement a lot. So a lot of the IT consultancy companies like Tata, Infosys, all these companies. Yeah, exactly. I don't know if Infosys is still around now, but they have lots of problems. But basically, those are the companies that are sucking up all the H-1Bs. Then what happened is the Trump administration really cracked down on it. They changed their guidance. They got a lot more aggressive with what they think qualifies for an H-1B. So how the H-1B works is you have to do something called a labor condition application, where you make an attestation to the Department of Labor, where you're saying you're going to pay this person at or above the prevailing wage for the area they're going to work in the classification. Or the actual wage is what other people get paid in the company, as long as it's above the prevailing wage, whichever is higher. So what tends to happen is a lot of employers are hiring entry-level people in their level 1 wage, and they're making, let's say, $40,000, $50,000. What is now happening under the Trump administration is the adjudicators at USCIS are looking at it and going, "Oh, level 1 wage, you can't be working in a specialty occupation that requires a complex knowledge and application of
they kind of don't match up.
Yeah, they're going, you're just a junior person, right? So what we've seen is that there's been a lot more denial, especially in the computer science fields, but we've seen it in recruitment as well. Recruitment, you fall under the HR category, HR specialist, which is a category that requires a degree, but we've seen denials, level 1 denials, where they said, well, great, that's great that the person has a degree, but we don't think that you need a degree to work in recruitment, because we have lots of data that shows that you don't, or you've not provided data to show that this is a requirement to work with you. Okay, so that I think the H is a bit problematic in that regard.
And one critical piece to that is you have to have a degree related to your job, which is essentially what we're saying. So it's not only do you have to have a degree, but it has to be related. So that can sometimes be very tricky, and that I've definitely seen over the years. It's become harder to make that kind of argument. Or equivalent in work experience. So if you've got somebody without a degree, they could have 12 years of work experience. But again, you're getting into a very kind of difficult argument. And all of this about US immigration is you're telling a story. So you're having to draft a 10-page letter or 15-page letter as to why that person, you think that the company thinks that person meets the criteria. So it's going back to that point of like the goalpost shifting all the time, and the adjudicators kind of disagreeing with you. So there's been a rise in what we call RFE rates, which is request for further evidence, meaning that the adjudicators at USCIS disagree with you, and then you have to kind of submit additional evidence. So it's very stressful for the company, very stressful for the applicant.
Because it's just in limbo for quite a while.
It does delay things quite considerably. It adds costs, and it creates that lack of certainty where business needs certainty in an existing difficult environment anyway. You're not guaranteeing that person's going to be able to start with you.
Great. So guys, circling back to the e-visas, sounds like that is the more viable option for a business looking to maybe break into the US and probably trying to get some key team members out into the US. So could you provide just a summary on the E2 visa and I guess things like the eligibility, some of the timeframes involved, and not necessarily going to cost, but I understand there's investment requirements as well. So just in summary, how would that work for someone?
I mean, it's split actually between, if people forget about the E1 actually, the E1 is the majority of your trade is within the US, but the E2 is the more commonly used one, which is substantial investment.
Okay.
So sometimes companies are eligible for both, but we'll concentrate for these purposes on the E2 because that is more commonly a file application. So the E2, I think the key is this nationality piece. Having spoken to clients a lot of the years, I think sometimes there's they think they might be British, but actually they're not, because you have to actually look up the tree until you get to the end, essentially, in terms of the company structure. So it's who owns that US business. If it's the UK business, who owns that UK business? And so you have to carry on until the end.
Up to the people.
Yeah,
because a lot of times people are like, well, actually, the company that owns it is.
Yeah, we got it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Like this is what we used to call a tracing exercise. So
right.
When we were in law school, you have to do property, and part of property is you have to find out who owns the property. If you're selling it and you're buying it, the person's buying it, they've got to make sure that the person who owns the property actually owns it. So they have to trace the title back.
All the way back.
So this is what I call a tracing exercise. You've got to trace that US company, like a piece of property, all the way back to who actually owns it. So
physical people.
To the physical people.
Yeah.
Exactly.
And then what nationality are they?
They have to be majority British in our scenario, or majority treaty national. 50%. I mean, you do have, well, yes, I mean, there is that, although it's easier, if you've got the kind of 51, it is easier.
Okay, yeah.
I mean, you can do a 50-50, and actually you can have a 50% relationship with another treaty country.
Yeah,
so, for example,
so 50% Germany, British,
exactly.
German
but it's a lot clearer and cleaner if you don't have that issue, particularly if the other 50 was with an American.
Yeah.
It's kind of, if you've got that 51, then there's then you have less of an issue around the control piece.
Okay.
So we tend to try like that 51, but
the big thing with that, I just kind of, the big point with that, I think what you're talking about is risk mitigation. So a lot of this kind of goes back to what I said about the subjective nature of this. You have a consular officer who's looking at all the documentation and looking at the rules and the law, and they're making a determination. So if you have things that are just at what the law says, they can, or in the gray,
it's open to interpretation.
It's open to interpretation. Anytime you open things up for interpretation by the consular officer, you create risk. So my job when I talk to clients is mitigate risk. How do we mitigate risk? So like Charlotte said, 50% would work. But if you could do 51, wow, it looks a lot better because that's ironclad, right?
Yeah.
So a lot of what we talk about and a lot of what I talk about is mitigating risk, because we don't want to get to the stage where we submit the case and there's like 5 question marks. And then you're relying on the consular officer to agree with what our take is on those 5 question marks.
And you know all the boxes that need to get
exactly.
Yeah. And where it becomes a bit more problematic is where you have diluted shareholding. So, for example, venture capitalists or pension funds, and that then becomes very complicated. And you then have an exercise of kind of working through and trying to show that percentage. But the one thing I like about this filing though is the embassy is very good. You can actually engage with them, and talk to them about, what is it that they're after.
Embassy in London, I should say.
Yes.
Would that be your job to communicate with them, or is this on the business that you're representing?
It's on behalf of the business, but So I think it's
we represent the business to the embassy. The
Yeah.
embassy doesn't have to do it. I mean, the client doesn't have to do it.
No, correct. Yeah.
Just on this as well, the E2 visa, is this for a company or is this for individuals or for both? And so how is that?
So basically, once you've established this nationality, so it could be an individual. So it could be you, Jeremy, setting up on your own, and that because you're British, you could do that as an option. Now, the business would need to be more than marginal, i.e., you couldn't just be making money just to kind of support yourself. In over a 5-year period, certainly. So what you would need to be submitting is a 5-year business plan to show your growth, to show your kind of intention to hire people. So it can apply to the very, very small businesses. I find the medium-sized businesses have less of an issue around the marginality piece.
Okay.
But sometimes it's a nationality piece that, because of the dilution, it becomes sometimes a little bit more complicated. So with a PLC, if they're floating on one stock market, then that is kind of prima facie evidence that they meet the nationality criteria. So you've got, then you're registering the company at the embassy, and then you can attack, then actually individual employees can then go under what I would call an umbrella. So you would literally be sending, if I was an employee of your company, I would then can apply for an E directly at the embassy.
Yeah.
So essentially I'm getting a work permit and a visa all at the same time once you've registered that business.
Okay, so
sorry, go ahead.
no, go on.
Well, that registration piece is a partnership with the company, and it's document gathering, etc. Think about a lever arch file worth of documents, although now it's all online, but that's the type of volume of documents that you're kind of needing.
So you would go through the process of registering my business, let's say, and that business could be approved based on the business plan provided in the application. But let's say my individual application wasn't strong enough. We were trying to put a few employees across. Those individuals, some could be approved, some could be rejected.
Correct.
But within the confines of the business being approved as well.
So
you would be attached.
you
have to
have, you can't register the company without having an applicant.
Have a physical
They
person.
stopped doing that like 14 years ago
Okay.
because they couldn't take a fee, right? So they
Okay,
used to
right,
register,
yeah.
and they used to go, oh, it's been registered, you can send your people in now. And then some people wouldn't actually send anybody in. They're like, okay, we did all this work, we didn't get paid.
Yeah.
So they're like, okay, you have to attach something. So it always has to be something. So
Okay.
your application would have to attach
Yeah, got it.
and the company. So we call it two applications actually. It's what we call the E2 company registration and the E2 visa application for the first person.
Yeah.
So the
Doesn't have to be you,
investor,
it could be somebody else.
or the executive, or
Okay. And
whoever can talk about that. I think the key, when I talk to my clients, is who do you want to represent the business? Because that person needs to be able to talk about the financials of the business and the projected growth, etc. So bringing that business plan to life at the embassy.
so really the person that you're attaching to the company registration, they need to be your kind of front-facing person that's really leading it. And then the other people that you're going to kind of send along with this visa, are they a bit easier once that initial bit's done to kind of send?
Yeah, I mean, you've then done the hard work of establishing that the business is eligible.
Okay.
Bearing in mind that other embassies are different on this front, but we won't go down that rabbit hole.
Yeah, every embassy does
yeah.
things.
So London's quite a good one.
London's
It is very good,
It's
yeah.
great.
Okay.
I love you guys. They're great. I think they're easy to communicate with. You know where they stand. You don't necessarily agree with everything they do because that is not how it works. And sometimes I think they make mistakes. We make mistakes. Everybody makes mistakes, right? We're people. But I think pretty much they're fair.
Yeah, okay.
Now, I would say I have a slightly different view to you. I don't necessarily think it needs to be the top guy that goes in for the registration. It just needs to be the guy you need.
Okay.
Right?
Okay.
Somebody that can talk, though,
That
about the business.
said, it depends. If they're like a manager level, they need to talk about the business. If they're not a manager level, they're specialists. They tend to not ask some questions about the business. They tend to just focus on the person and why the company's expanding. They don't get into the nitty-gritty. But we prepare them as if they might get asked those questions, but they tend to not.
Yeah, well, actually, one of the reasons why I encourage, because I think that people assume that you have to be relocating. So one conversation I have with business is if you've got a senior executive that will be spending a considerable amount of time in the US and is effectively managing that US entity, even though they're not relocating, that actually might be the person you want to attach, because then you're protecting them, because then they're getting the work, but they're getting a work permit as well. So I think there's this presumption that you only need to get visas for the people that are actually relocating.
Okay.
But there can be this kind of sense of intermittent. It applies for the L as well. Paul's absolutely right. You can send somebody more junior, but I kind of want that, make sure that there's no other person there that's more senior that actually, okay, they're not relocating, but they're going to be spending a considerable amount of time in the US. And sometimes people forget about those guys because they need protection as well.
And they need some form of work permit.
Yeah.
So time frames, 1 month, 12 months, and I'm presuming, depending on who the client is, how big the project is, or how many people they're sending, how prepared they are as business is going to affect this. But could you give me a kind of ballpark figure of, you know, someone that's quite well prepared, got their stuff together, how long that would take versus someone that maybe there's a bit of back and forth?
I think probably maybe you want to just talk about the government processing timelines,
Okay.
and then because the reality is clients can take, people can take
Yeah.
however long.
Yeah.
It's like having a piece of string.
Yeah.
I've had clients that are like on it, you know, like
Get
fire,
stuff back.
like
Okay.
get done. Here's all the stuff you need in a month. And
Yeah.
I've had other clients. I have clients now that like every like couple weeks they drip feed me a
Okay,
document.
yeah.
I'm like, oh, we're almost there. The breadcrumb, we're almost there.
So that's a really good way of framing it.
I think when you're talking about like process, talk about. I think that's what you focus on.
Cool.
It takes us some time to prep it, like a couple weeks.
Yeah.
You know, and then the government takes X amount of time. But the client, their time is their time.
Yeah, exactly. So
This is the problem. The client is the problem.
Okay.
No offense, no offense, guys.
No, I completely agree.
But-
Because when people kind of push me on this point, it's like, well, how long are you going to take to get these documents to me is actually the critical piece here.
Yeah.
And sometimes people come to me really early with just an idea, which, you know, you then have to kind of say, you have to start at the beginning, you have to incorporate the business, you need physical premises, you need this business plan, you're way too early.
Okay.
So that's one thing we haven't discussed. It's that, you know, we're making the assumption here that people are that little bit further on, because you have to be imminently operational in order to be eligible for this visa. So it can't just be an idea. It has to be way further down the line.
You can't kind of go, well, I want to go to the US, I'm going to wait until I get my E2 visa approved and then I'll start working on it. You need to, it's the other way around. You need to be
100%.
actively doing stuff.
Yeah.
So then you go for
One of
it.
the requirements, we can sit here all day and talk about the requirements. So thankfully we're not doing that. One of the requirements is that you've invested.
Okay.
And investment is risk, right?
Yeah.
So they're saying you've spent money, right? So we have to show as part of the registration for an E2 that you spent money on setting up the business, because that's how you qualify. That's why it's called an investor visa.
Yeah.
If it was called an invest tomorrow visa, it'd be different.
Yeah.
So you can't actually apply for the visa without doing investments. The client has to go out and do these things, like Charlotte said. They have to spend money, right? They have to get office space, right? And that's four walls on the door. I know that's really antiquated, but welcome to, you know.
But it's not too, I mean, we work in New York or
So
wherever.
get office space, get incorporated, pay those legal fees, get whatever equipment you need. If you need a server, if you need computers, buy it. If you need certain software to operate,
So
do it.
building up that story.
You've got to do that
Yeah.
before we can actually prepare the case. Because if you've not done that, we can't do the second tracing exercise, which is where your funds have come from, where you spent, right?
Okay.
The first tracing exercise is nationality. The second is, have you spent your number? And how we do that is we trace it back to the client's bank account, right? So you have a lease. Let's say we try to get clients to front end the lease payments because we can have it all as part of the investment. So let's say they paid 6 months in advance at WeWork and it costs them $10,000. Great. Here's the lease agreement. Here's a 10 grand invoice. Here's that bank statement showing you paid 10 grand. Okay, we've traced that investment, that part of the investment. We have to do that with everything they spend. Okay, so this is the thing. If clients are going, yeah, we want Joe out to the US in 2 months. Okay, what have you done in the US? Have you set up? No. Okay, it's not going to happen, right? So I think the clients have to be more realistic with timescales and understand that they actually have to do a lot of running around to get it done. Now, if the company's already set up in the US and they just didn't get an e-visa for whatever reason, e-registration for whatever reason, that's a lot easier.
Okay.
We need tax returns. We need all these other things. But usually the place will happen, you know, so.
And then to answer your question, once you are ready to file, then at the moment the embassies take about 6 weeks.
6 weeks.
But that does kind of vary.
6 weeks for initial review or 6 weeks for the
I would say initial review, and then basically what they do, they invite you, Jeremy, if you're attached to the application, for an interview, which is normally kind of a 2 week kind of window.
They could also request more documentation if they don't
do.
understand something.
Yeah.
Or there's something that's complicated, or they don't feel like they've got enough documentation. And if that happens, it takes however long it takes you to respond to that, and then another week.
Okay. So just to recap, we've got the nationality British. Owned British national going out there. We've put in the application. So, I mean, we've got incorporated, we've done the investment. We are putting in the application for the company and for the individual at the same time. Once that application goes in, we're talking about 6 weeks So the interview, did you say?
No,
No,
6 weeks
for
to be invited.
Invited
Yeah.
for interview.
So basically,
if everything's there.
once you submit it, so we'll submit the case, so it's a company registration and individual's application. Then it's about 6 weeks from receipt that the embassy reviews it.
Okay.
And they have the special officers who just review the company registrations, and they make notes and they provide these notes to the officers for the interview. During that 6 weeks, they might say, okay, your business plan doesn't have 5-year profit and loss projections. We need that, right? So they'll send a email to us and they'll say, this case is missing this, this, and this, okay? So when that happens, the case processing stops. Okay? And then we get that documentation from the client, goes back to the embassy, and then usually once the embassy gets it, it's another week.
Okay.
So if there is a request, it could add a couple weeks.
Okay.
But if there's not a request at that 6-week period, they review it and they invite us to schedule an interview for the person. And like Charlotte said, the interviews typically within 2 weeks.
Yeah. And then, all being well, going to the embassy for the interview, then you're talking about 5, if it's approved, you're talking about 5 days, 5 to 7 days.
Yeah.
Roughly. So I think if somebody were to kind of
Working
really,
days,
sorry, working days.
trying to cover
So-
this.
So I mean, on the whole, I think you're looking at a couple of months once somebody has filed
Okay.
and everything's kind of in good shape.
Yeah, for the government side. However long it takes the client to invest and all that
Yeah.
stuff is on them.
Yeah.
I think from a legal perspective, it takes us a couple weeks
Yeah.
to put it all together. I think that one of the biggest problems we have with clients is it's great. I love that my clients think that they're my only client because I want them to feel like that, right? Because I want to look after them. But a lot of times they forget that about other clients. And I think they're like, yeah, we just got you everything. Like, when is it going to go in? Man, it's been like 3 months. You've taken 3 months to get this to me. I need some time.
Yes, I have to review.
I actually do a job. Like
Yeah.
I actually prepare to make sure it gets approved. So I can't just magic it up. So I think it takes us probably 2 weeks to get everything done.
Yeah, I think that's probably accurate. And the thing is as well, you don't want to rush these things either because the point is you're building a story. So
Yeah.
and you want to you want to reduce the risk of having these RFEs as a request for further evidence. So quite often you're preparing it and then you're going back to the company for more information or clarity on X, Y, Z. So it's working together to get to that kind of that end.
So that kind of perfectly leads us into the next slide and the next question to you, Paul, which is when the Department of State are reviewing this rather than the USCIS, right?
Yeah.
So what are they looking for as part of this story that you're helping the client build up? Are they looking for you to hire US nationals, to invest considerably, to grow? What are they kind of marking this company?
I think it really depends on the type of business we're doing. Okay, so we're just going to talk about recruiting here.
Yeah.
So to touch on what Charlotte said earlier, there's 3 different types, I think. You've got like the individual guy who's looking to set up in the US. So I've done those before where they've run recruitment consultancy firms, one-man bands in the UK. They got some traction in the US. They want to go to the US. It's a lot more detailed of a process for that person because I think their case is more scrutinized, right? And the reason it's more scrutinized is because a lot of people want to live in the US and not actually run a business. So you see a lot of times people will, of a certain age, will want to retire in the US, but you can't because there's no visa that allows you to retire in the US. So they're like, oh, I'll open a pub in like Orlando, like I want to go to Florida. So they'll open a pub or a tea shop or some bullshit in Florida, but they don't really intend on making it a real business.
Okay.
So those cases are overly scrutinized just based on the fact that, the embassy has seen a lot of
People do that stuff, yeah.
Right. So if you've got a smaller business that doesn't have much traction, isn't doing a lot in the UK, or it's just a one person going out to set up, there's going to be more scrutiny. So we're going to want to probably be over the top with what documents we provide, but also they're adjudicated. The consular officer is going to look at it at a lot more strict lens, right?
Yeah.
If it's a huge business, right? Millions upon millions in turnover, 100 plus employees. Okay, it's not that huge, but you know what I'm saying. Their application's probably going to be less scrutinized because they've already done it. Nobody's going to set an office in the U.S. And try to enter that market and grow in that market with a big business unless they are going to make money on it and they're going to be growing and they're going to hire U.S. workers to do all these things, right? So I think those cases, well, they are scrutinized, like all the cases, to make sure they qualify in law, less so. And then you've got the people in between, which is anything, right? So if it's a 20-person business, okay, there's going to be probably more scrutiny than the high level, but not as much scrutiny as low level. But they're still looking at the same facts, right, and the same law, right? So the things that the officers are going to look at is nationality, we talked about, the investment. How much did they invest? Was that investment enough to set up the business? Okay, so for something like a services, professional services sales type office,
yeah.
I would say in the UK, an investment of like at least $20,000 to $30,000 should be the baseline. That should be sufficient.
Okay.
Right? And I think 20,000 is like the absolute minimum, but that is what I would call core investment. Things that you have to spend money on to keep the business running. So your incorporation, tax advice, let's say, getting your office space, any other costs associated with setting that office.
Hiring a few staff.
If you hire staff, that would count as a core investment. All the other stuff, what I call ancillary investment, that's great, and we put that in part of the number, so like travel, anything else, conferences, those kind of things that help the brand. We add it in, but that's not core investment. We can't make an argument to the embassy that like, oh yeah, this is how much it costs to set up, and he's been flying around in circles, right?
Yeah.
And then the third thing we look at is what I call cash in bank, which they would look at as an investment for operational costs. But again, it can't be the core investment. You can't put $100,000 in the bank account and say, oh, we've invested.
Yeah.
You have to actually show
committed to something. Yeah.
So part of that investment is what they look at as substantiality, how substantial that is. And they look at it from a proportional basis. And what that means is effectively, if you're on the lower end of cost for setting up a business, let's say 20, 30, 40,000, they want you to spend that money. If you're doing a manufacturing hub and it's 100 million and you invested 5 million, that's probably sufficient because it's a different thing, right? So you've got that. The other issue is marginality, which Charlotte talked about. So if it's an individual, marginality is looked at a lot differently. What they're looking at for marginality, if it's an individual investor, is effectively, will this business in 5 years earn enough income to support the investor in this firm? Okay, which is why the 5-year business plan is important.
Okay.
When you don't have an individual investor, when it's a corporate investor, they're still looking at things like how much does the company earn, but they're looking at more of like from a benefit to the U.S. Yeah. So are you going to be employing U.S. workers? How is it going to be a positive impact on the U.S.? And those things we cover in the business plan. And that's why the business plan is really important.
And just on that, is there a requirement to hire U.S. nationals? So if I put in an application, and kind of two scenarios really. One, I say that I am going to hire US nationals and I don't. Is there a review after 2 years and do they kind of check on that and could I lose the visa? And then the other one is if I put that actually it's just me going there or a couple of other people and I'm going to take them across. I've got no plans to hire US nationals. How does that kind of...
No, there's no requirement that you hire US nationals. Okay. I mean, it helps the case, right? So anytime you have U.S. nationals being hired, you're looking at a positive impact there. So in a consular officer's eyes, it's a good thing. Is it required? No, it doesn't. There's nothing in the law that says that you have to, with regulations or guidance that says you have to hire U.S. workers. Okay. But if we're looking at a positive impact, and they're looking at your tax return and how much money you're making, you can look at how great the business is for the local area and those kind of things. Like in smaller cases, sometimes it's good to get Chamber of Commerce letters and things like that. But these are for like individual investors. For like a decent sized business, we don't bother with any of that. But no, they won't come back and say you've not hired any U.S. workers.
Okay.
Now, you touch on a good point. When I talk about the bans, they also can approve the visa in different year increments based on how strong they think the case is. So if it's this giant company and they hire, they're making all this money and they're setting up in the U.S. and they're going to grow in the U.S., they would typically get a 5-year approval. So your e-visa company is registered for 5 years, and everybody who applies during that 5-year period will get a 5-year visa.
Okay.
Right. If it's a medium-sized business, if they've got good traction, they're doing well in the in the UK, and they're going out, we tend to see that they get 5-year visas as well, right? But when it's really small business, like when I've done one-person recruitment consultancy firms, they will tend to get either 2 or 3 years. Okay. They won't typically give them 5 years. Why is that? The reason they do that is they want to see how the company's progressing and whether it's a real business,
Okay.
it's a viable business. So you're looking at that 5-year P&L. They're not going to go back and look at that typically and say, "Oh, you said."
Yeah, so you projected this,
years.
and yeah.
They don't do that, but they will say, "Okay, let's see your last tax return. What have you done? How are you growing? This business?" And it makes it harder to actually get an approval beyond the 3 years if you're not actually getting your ass in here and doing things. Right?
Which is better than the L. You only get 1 year.
Yeah, which is I was going to talk about a whole thing about why L's are shit. Sorry, why L's are shit. I've said it.
Yeah.
Compared to the E, I just run off a few of those.
Go for it.
It's super expensive, ridiculously expensive. Right? Legal fees, government fees. Government fees alone are what?
About 2 grand.
10 times more expensive than an E. Okay. There's no benefit to the company for doing that. It's just for the individual, so you don't have an E2 registration or anything like that. We can talk about something for that later. It's helpful. You only get these. Well, then you're submitting an application to U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services. Super aggressive. The denial rates are like through the roof. L1B specialized knowledge. You're talking about like 40% to 50% denial rate.
Wow.
Right? And then for managers, it's probably creeping 20-25% now. It's huge, especially under Trump. So before I stop you, I'll stop you before you go on because there's a lot more.
Okay.
It's terrible. If it's a new office, if the U.S. company has been operational for more than a year, you're only getting a 1-year visa, or you're only getting a 1-year approval. Now they do this really ridiculous thing where they approve the visa for 5 years, but the underlying approval is only a year. So the visa is still valid, so you don't need to get a new visa, let's say, but you need to still extend this thing.
Wow.
You have to extend it in 2-year increments after that 1 year for up to 7 total years as a manager executive, or 5 as a specialized knowledge employee. So they would have to leave for a year and then come back, or switch to another visa category, right? Then to get an extension after the year, especially if you're a manager or executive, it's a huge gamble, right? And the reason for that is in 2013 or 2012, there was an Inspector General report, the Office of Inspector General in the U.S. government. They basically said that something like 50% of new office L's were fraud. So what's happened is, as a result of that, U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services got really aggressive in these cases. We want to weed out fraud. Fine, weed out fraud, but they've gone like the total opposite.
Probably viable.
Yeah. So
Applications have been rejected. Yeah.
We've seen so much that they've come to us after they've been rejected. They're like, "Why didn't you get an E to start with?" "Oh, my lawyer."
Yeah.
I'm like, God damn.
They're really all underused.
So
really.
The reason they're underused, and I think that, well, there's a couple points for this, but let me finish my diatribe about it now. Shit, don't use it unless you have to, right? There is no benefit to having an L over the E. You can get a green card from an E. Like, there's so much terrible information out there about you can't get a green card if you have an E. I'm like, yes, you can. Facts. So it all depends on facts, right? But that's like an old wives' tale. It only pertains to one type of green card when you own the business and you've set up in the U.S. and you have no foreign office.
Yeah.
I won't get into it, but it's ludicrous. We do it all the time. Then it's pointless. But so going back to your other point, why do people do the L? So there have been times in the dark ages where it took longer to get an E2 approval through like Embassy of London. Like there was one time, 2006,
it was about 6 months.
It took 6 months. I had one client took a year to get E2. So we were doing L's because why are you gonna wait 6 months? So we do like an L for one guy because they need him out the US, and then we do an E for him as well. Or we do an E for somebody else, and we wait for it to get registered. And then instead of extending the L, we bring the guy back. So that happened a lot. And I think probably 2012, they got really quick at doing the E's, and we just did 13, and we started focusing on the E's a lot more. But we always focus on E's. I always would do an E over an L.
Yeah, definitely.
Every time.
Can I just ask
Yeah, go ahead.
the individuals that get approved, are they tied to that employer now? Could they, when they go to
They
the
are
US?
the L's though, and the H as
L and
well.
L,
Well, H has actually got portability, but yeah.
They're always
You're-
tied.
yeah.
You're tied no matter what, unless you do a separate filing where you get.
So you need another company to put you under your application.
Yeah. So what happens with the E2? We see this recruitment all the time. I mean, I see the same guy like every year for like a different company. I'm like, oh, I know this guy. they'll go to a company, they'll quit, they'll go to another company.
They'll do the E2.
Yeah, what they typically do is bring them back to the UK, have them apply for a new E2 visa, and send them back.
The one thing though, just to be careful with the E though, is that companies, I don't know about you, Paul, but clients don't always come back and tell you whether they've changed their their structure. For example, if there've been venture capitalists involved, or and that then changes the E fundamental the underlying kind of eligibility of the E. So if you then change that shareholding thing that we talked about at the beginning, then the E then is no longer an option. So that is just something to be really conscious of, and that includes your employees that are under the E, because they're no longer eligible.
So we've seen this a lot where the company's been bought by another company, and they've done all this due diligence, but totally forgot about their employees. Like, oh yeah, the visa's still valid. Yeah, it's valid on its face, but technically it's not valid underlying.
Yeah, if they dug into it,
But I think, at least right now, immigration is pretty relaxed on this issue because it's impossible to change somebody's status as quickly as you can, because you'd have to move them from an E to an L to an H or something, and it just takes too long. So even though technically they're not, the visas aren't valid anymore, and I would say that they have to change, and we do to work to do that. I think there's a lot of leeway in that change, because I think the reality is, as a business, you can't fundamentally do that. Nobody.
There is, but it's just that you obviously at the renewal stage you need to be very cognizant, and then and I think with all of immigration, and this applies beyond US immigration, is this you have to plan ahead. So it's thinking about re-registration. So I just had a client ring me, and he's up for re-registration in a year. And he's calling me now, kind of discussing the business, and that is actually a really good thing. Most clients don't do that. But, keeping in touch with your immigration lawyer and kind of being conscious that you have to renew that registration. But yeah, I think to Paul's point, the benefit of the E is you're registering that business, and then you can very quickly get people underneath that, and they're not going through that reassessment of the company eligibility every time. Whereas with the L, you have to almost do a complete filing every single time. And one of the key things I always say to clients is you can have two people with identical everything, and one gets the visa, one doesn't. That's how crazy the system is.
I think it's the same too with E's. I mean, we've not touched on this, but I'm just going to buy on that. But once a company's registered, one of the hardest things we see for recruitment consultants is setting employees that are what we call essential workers or specialists, right? And the reason for that is, you're going into the embassy, the individual the application is all about that individual. The company's registered. So they've got to show that they're a specialist, that they have knowledge that is needed in the US, okay? So that could either be a short-term specialist, so somebody has knowledge that they're transferring for a short period of time, let's say 2 years, or a long-term specialist, somebody who has integral knowledge in business, clients, etc., that is important to the growth of the US company. A lot of times with recruitment consultants, we see that our clients want to send in people who are performing really well, but have no experience, and that is a problem.
Like new grads in particular.
Like new grads, they got 6 months or a year. Oh, they're a best biller. They're not going to get a visa. Now they might. Like there's the.
So it's worth a punt.
If you want, but here,
go on.
Yeah, no, it's okay. You might, like it's volume. Some of the bigger guys, recruitment consultants, I think do this, like throw and see what sticks kind of approach. We just have like 50 guys saying if 10 get approved, great. If none of them, we don't care.
But the problem with doing that though is that person then has to disclose their visa denial afterwards.
They can't
and that will impact ESTA travel.
They can't travel visa.
So that means that you're really probably going to get an ESTA denial. So it's that means your travel to Disney is affected. So it's you do need to be careful about this stuff. Once you've gone down that within US immigration, unlike some other countries that are more administrative and it's more bureaucratic and it's more about, I don't know, if you're missing a document, then you get denied, but you can just resubmit with that extra document and there's no big problem. With US immigration, these things follow you. You then have to always disclose you've got visa denial. So I don't think it's good strategy just to kind of say.
Yeah, I don't either. I totally agree. But I think the reality is what I'm saying is that it doesn't necessarily matter if you're talking about the low end of the specialist, like people who have 4 years or less experience, people who don't have degrees. There is a lot of risk, right? And a lot of this is what I would call consular officer roulette. It depends on who you get on the day. We can write how great, this great letter. We can prep the client, talk to them about what they're going to be asked and how they. Two things matter: how the client does on the day. Can they explain why they're a specialist, why the company needs them, and what consular officer they get?
Yeah.
And I think people are taken aback by the fact that there's aggressive consular officers because they're so used to Americans being friendly and customer service. I had a client who they were quite junior level, but they were doing really good work for the company, less than 2 years experience. I thought, okay, we can do this. We have to talk about what you're doing and talk about the specialism. They went in, there was 2 of them, they went in, they both got approved, which is great. But the officer was like, I don't understand why you're a specialist. And then the applicant explained, I still don't understand. And just kind of berated them.
Yeah.
Still
you need to be
approved, which is
prepared.
great.
Yeah.
So but you've got to be prepared beyond being prepared.
That's
So-
what this point about the executive order about why America hire
Why
America
can't
is.
they?
We're
Why?
now getting these questions like before we didn't, of why can't a US worker do this job?
Yeah.
So the critical piece here is that the interview is more significant than people think.
Yeah.
The oral piece of this. So, and this applies to all visa classes. It's not just over-reliance on the documents, over-reliance on your kind of, the lawyer has done everything they should do.
Yeah.
Is not enough. That person needs to be
Yeah.
presenting well. And that culturally can sometimes be a challenge with some clients,
Yeah.
or shy or whatever. This is not the time to be humble.
Yeah.
You have to go there and sell yourself.
We're going to have to go to questions because we're going to
Okay.
have to wrap up in
Me
6
and Paul
minutes.
can talk forever.
You guys can.
Yeah, we've
Give us
got,
another hour.
we've got one question.
Yeah.
What is the best visa option if you're just starting your US presence in the US prior to an E2 application and just setting up your subsidiary branch, as it really matters it is? Is it best for UK staff to travel on tourist or B1 visas until the E2 is approved?
ESTA, yeah.
So,
Visa
and,
waiver.
and on that then, if I'm going on an ESTA, can I work? And when I say work, am I able to go to the office and
Yeah.
attend meetings?
You can basically set up the business. So it's, negotiation of contracts,
Sign leases.
yeah,
do all that
exactly.
stuff.
All of that is possible. But as soon as you get into management and direction,
And repping the US
And-
office, like saying you're working for the US office.
But what it,
but there is a
dangerous.
dangerous
All that
grey
stuff is
period.
wrong.
Yeah.
but what about when you're at the border check at the airport and they say you're here for pleasure or work, and you say work, surely, and you're going on an ESTA
No,
never
visa.
so
say
here's
work.
the deal, right? So this is it, right? Americans for immigration, work is the worst word. Don't ever use that word. Because
Okay.
work means I'm going there to work
Yeah.
for a US business, or I'm going there to work for a client. I'm actually
I'm
doing
performing work.
Productive work, yeah.
hands-on work, right? Always business. The law says business or tourism. It doesn't say work or tourism.
Okay, so
right?
business.
So always use the term business. What are you
Okay.
here for? Oh, I'm here for business. What are you doing? Oh, we're looking to set up an office. You're looking at office space. We're talking to
or
lawyers.
meeting some clients.
All that stuff is fine. All
Okay,
that stuff is
okay,
fine.
fine.
The big no-nos, black and white no-nos, are working for a U.S. company without authorization, right? Where you're getting paid. That's a huge no-no. Doing work, hands-on work for a U.S. company where there's no connection to a foreign business, where you're employed, remunerated, and
Yeah.
controlled by that business. Pretty much anything that you would think is considered work for a U.S. company is not going to be accepted.
But sorry, one thing though you do need to be careful about is like frequency and length
Yeah.
of travel. So if you start to build up a pattern, that's when you start to get into this kind of very dangerous
You're on the
area.
radar then, yeah.
You're there like 1 week, a month, for example. You may get away with it for a certain period of time. Even if it's genuine business, you're then entering into this kind of you're relying on discretion and the Customs and Border Protection being okay with the story you're
Yeah.
presenting to them. So you do need to be careful and conscious, particularly for your executive and it's basically a balance of risk. I think Paul mentioned this earlier. That you do need to be careful during this period of setup. You do need to be cognizant. Business is fine, work is not,
Yeah.
essentially.
So we're going to have to wrap up. Just in very, very quick, can companies get contractors, UK, EU nationals into the US and do work?
Only if they're employed by the U.S. entity.
And in order to do that, they'd have to have a visa.
They have to have a visa. They have to be W-2 employees.
Sure.
They couldn't just be contractors.
Yeah. So we're going to have to wrap up now. Sorry to kind of rush to finish there, but our contact details are here. If you want to get in touch with Paul, his email is there, and the same with Charlotte. They'll be able to help with any visa needs that you have, and of course, if you want to get in touch with PGC about employing a US workforce, please just directly email me. Thanks everyone for your time, and thanks to Paul and thanks to Charlotte.
Thank you.